Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. Today we are talking about March of the Machines, the new set that's going to come out on April the 18th, I believe it is, on MTG Arena. So, I'd like to do kind of a bit of a limited set review here. I'm going to focus in on the commons and uncommons. And first I wanted to share a couple of speculations of mine, things that I can't prove just yet, but that I think are probably true about the set. This set cares about Convoke. This set also cares about Incubate. So you make these little tokens that aren't even creatures yet until you pump mana into them. It also cares about battles. Battles are permanents which direct attacks away from your opponent's face in order to gain long-term value. And these different mechanics are kind of piling up in my mind to lead to this being a slower format. Maybe not the slowest format I've ever seen, right? I played Rise of the Eldrazi. Rise of the Eldrazi was purposefully very slow. Also, if you watched my April Fool's Day videos on Homelands, Homelands is probably one of the most incredibly slow limited formats of all time. But anyway, I think this one's going to be pretty slow. Having more creature tokens on the board gums up the ground, right? We know this from, Rise of the Eldrazi. When there were little token creatures, you could sacrifice for mana. This set has a bunch of little token creatures. They are going to gum up the ground, and that is going to make the game go later. And the tokens that are incubator tokens, those are even slower. When you flip them over, they've already been in play, so they could attack that turn, but it's an investment of mana. So it's not even as good as a creature just straight up. It takes an additional investment to get them going. And then there's the battles, and battles could help you to close out a game, but first you have to attack them. Now you could just kind of leave it sitting around on the battlefield after you get its, enter the battlefield trigger. But I think most people are going to want to take the opportunity to flip their battles if they can. And that's directing resources away from killing the opponent. So there's just a lot of stuff going on in this set that I think is going to lead to a grindier, longer game of Magic, and that being the case, some of these, like this common cycle of, basic land cycling creatures, like every color has one of these. I think with how slow this format's going to be, that you're going to play these cards and you're going to get the opportunity to cast them for the front face of the card, right? Like this Alabaster Host Intercessor. I think you'll get the chance to cast it for 6 mana. Because I think this format's going to lend itself to longer games. That's not to say you can't build a fast deck. They've done a good job in recent years of breaking board stalemates. So you can prioritize your synergies and prioritize the things that make a faster game if you want to have a faster game. That being said, though, I think you should have more of an eye towards value. And the, kind of the potential of a card on its own to win the game by itself, like its own individual value as a piece of cardboard. And also, you should look at things like card advantage and such. And I think those are going to be more impressive in this format than they were in Phyrexia All Will Be One. All Will Be One was a very, fast, kind of tempo, intense format. That being said, let's go ahead and do a quick review of commons and uncommons here. Alright, so Aerial Boost is a white instant. It's common for 2. It has Convoke, so it might cost 0 potentially. And a target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying. Very reasonable trick. Kind of cool that you can do it when you're tapped out. So definitely not the worst. Any trick you can do when you're tapped out might blow out the opponent. So it's alright. You should be aware the opponent can do this as well. Alabaster Host Intercessor, I think this is actually pretty good. Plane cycling for 2 means you can fix your mana for, colorless in the early part of the game and keep hitting your land drops. And if this comes down, you've got, like a 3/4 kind of Annex Sentry Brutal Cathar type of thing, which it's got a decent sized body on its own, and by the time you're getting to 6 mana, there's probably something of the opponents that you want to take off the board to either stop them from killing you or break a stalemate. I think you'll find plenty of use for it. Alabaster Host Sanctifier, it's 2/2 with lifelink. So if you get into a kind of a Voltron deck, and there is a +1/+1 counter synergy deck, I think it's in maybe green-white, then this card might be pretty good. If you're boosting this up, there's some good equipment that's common in the set too. We're going to take a look at that later. If you've got things to put on this, then Lifelink's a nice ability. If you don't, if you're just playing this as a Lifelink bear, then I think this card is going to be pretty forgettable in this format. It's probably going to trade away with an incubator token. I think this is going to be a slower format. Let's move on. Angelic Intervention, this is an instant. Creature or planeswalker you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. So you get the option of protection from colorless. That's interesting. If it's a creature, you put a +1 counter on it. Might even get a permanent boost. I think this is a really solid trick. Very solid trick. It's actually pretty nice that it can gain protection from colorless. It could have some constructed applications as well. There's a colorless battle that can exile something. There's there's some artifacts like the 8 mana guy who can, when you cast it, blow something up and you get a Power Stone. Protection from colorless is not nothing in constructed, and in this format it's going to have things it does as well. So overall I think this is a pretty strong trick. Can get a creature through unblocked if all of their blockers are one color or colorless. Let's see, we're going to skip the rares and mythics here. I don't have time for everything. This is more for limited than it is for constructed. Planeswalkers are bombs, though. Attentive Skywarden. We got a 2/2 flyer for 3. And if this deals combat damage to a player or a battle, you transform an incubator token. So this saves you 2 mana. And that can be a big deal if you want your deck to be fast in this format, right? So you've got an evasive creature. All right, it's a flyer. So you're already maybe getting in for damage here. And then on top of that, you're saving mana transforming your incubator tokens, which means you can get a more aggressive start into the game. The incubator can't attack that turn, but just saving yourself mana in the process means you can get on the board. I think the Skywarden's going to be pretty good with the incubator token strategies. All right, Bola Slinger. This is a backup creature. When it attacks, tap an artifact or creature an opponent controls, or, the creature you put the backup on can do this once. So this is kind of so-so. Right, it can only be used offensively. Maybe you can tempo the opponent out of the game. I think that's going to be difficult in this format, but backup, I think, is kind of a way you could do that. I think backup is maybe a more tempo-oriented deck. But the interesting thing about backup to me is that you might leave around a bunch of creatures that aren't that good at attacking later. I mean, the Bola Slinger in this case can keep tapping something and getting in. Maybe. But a lot of other backup creatures are not as big on their front face if they give away their counter. And that's going to gum up the ground too, just like the token creatures are. It'd be good for Convoke. But I think there's going to be a lot of board stalls that can potentially happen with a bunch of small creatures running around on the ground. Okay, skipping the rares. Cut Short. Instant for 3 and white with Convoke, so it might cost nothing. Destroy a Planeswalker that was activated this turn, so usually that's only on the opponent's turn, unless it's Wandering Emperor. Or a tapped creature. Cut Short, you know, it can kill an attacking creature without vigilance. So that's useful as an instant. Otherwise, this doesn't clear blockers out of the way for you. It's a very defensive thing. It could kill a Planeswalker, but only after it's been used. Actually, I'm not that impressed with Cut Short. You'll use it. It'll see some play, but it's more defensively oriented than offensively oriented. Elspeth Smite. 1 white instant deals 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Pretty good. Pretty good for 1 white. So, you know, deal 3 for 1 is a pretty good rate. The creature has to get into combat, though. And that means you can clear out a blocker, but only after it's already blocked. So it's not as offensive as some types of removal. I think it's at a good rate, though, at 1 white. The exile could be useful, too. Enduring Bondwarden. This is a 0/1 human scout for 1 white. It's got backup 1. So it can put a counter elsewhere. When this creature dies, put its counters on target creature you control. So, interestingly, the Bondwarden could give away its counter, and then if that creature dies, could possibly get its counter back. And then, when the Bondwarden dies, it could pass its counter along as well. And that's neat. It's neat. You could kind of play hot potato with the +1 counter. This is an example of one of the little backup creatures I was talking about, where if you give away the counter, this is a 0/1. And that means that a lot of cards like this are going to clog up the board. You might make something big enough to where it can attack in. Or maybe you kind of do that as like a tempo thing, and then like the board locks up, and then it can't get in very well after that. I don't know, man. So this could be a 1/2 for 1 mana that can pass along its counter when it dies. It's okay. I'm not super impressed. Golden Scale Aeronaut. 5 mana, 2/3 Dwarf Pilot with flying. It has backup 1. So this could be a 3/4 flyer, or it could jump a creature, like give it a +1 counter, give it flying for 1 turn. Which, if you do that, then you know, again, you'll get in for 1 turn with that other creature, and then you'll have this 2/3 flyer for 5, which isn't not great as a 5-drop. Maybe it's good enough. Maybe the counter you put on something else is good enough. Maybe if you need it to be a 3/4, you play it that way. It's okay. It's okay. I don't love it. I don't hate it either. You know, if you just played it as a 3/4 for 5, that would be acceptable. Alright, Infected Defector. This is 5 mana. It's a common. It's a 4/3, 1 white pip. Thyorexia Knight. When Infected Defector dies, incubate 3. So you get a 4/3 for 5, then it dies, and you get a 3/3 that you have to pay 2 mana to turn into a creature. I think the value on this is really good. A 4/3 is a great blocker. Great blocker, not the worst attacker. And then you can get another 3/3 with an investment of 2 mana. I like this. Think it's pretty good. I think if this ends up being a slow format, then this card is going to be pretty good. Alright. Inspired Charge, instant, 2 white, 2 colorless, common. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. This is a good way to finish the game. And a card like this is going to be quite good in this format, right? I remember one of the ways in Rise of the Eldrazi that you could get in to win the game was to pump up all your little tokens. There were some lords that could pump up the Eldrazi little, sack tokens. There were also effects like this that could pump up all of your creatures. And if you go really wide, and maybe if you've got like a Convoke deck or something, or blue-white I think has like a Knight theme where they can make a lot of token creatures, maybe this will win you the game. I think this is pretty reasonable with all the little things that are going to stall the ground in this game. So, maybe you want a copy or two of Inspired Charge in your deck. Stall the board on purpose, win by going wide. I think it's pretty good. Kithkin Billy Rider. So this is a 1/3 double striker for 3. It's a Kithkin Knight. Nothing more to say as far as its rules text. Double strike is good. If you get a couple of like double strikers or first strikers, they become very strong on defense. And I have noticed that there's more double strike and first strike than I'm used to seeing on cards in this set, which can create a wall of first strike that your opponents might not be able to get through. So maybe look for that in white and red. Otherwise, this would be great with a piece of equipment or an aura or something like that. +1 counters. It's not great on its own. It's okay though. And then if you build into it, maybe you do a little bit of a Voltron build. This will be solid enough. I should take a moment here to say why I'm not giving these number ratings yet. I don't feel comfortable number rating these cards yet. I feel like I need to know more about this format before I can give a proper ranking to these cards. Right, so like a 5.0 is a card that you always play in your deck regardless of color. Usually it has to be an artifact or colorless thing that's amazing. 0 is like completely unplayable even as a sideboard card. 3s are like your bread and butter. It's like a card that's always good enough to make the cut in a deck of that color. So those are like your good uncommons, kind of top-notch commons, stuff like that. Those are like 3s. I don't know enough about this format yet to where I feel like my card ratings would be of real use at the moment. So I just want to, look with you all at this set and kind of give you some of my ideas here. As soon as it releases, I am going to jump in on some drafts, hopefully get a little bit of a feel for how this set plays. In the meantime, let's just keep reading. Knight of the New Coalition. So this is a 2/2 human knight for 4, vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, get a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. So white-blue is like a knight creature type kind of deck. It's a creature token archetype. Good at going wide. You can play into the knight theme. They've got lords for the knights at uncommon, I believe. There are just various ways that you can take advantage of that. This is 4 power and toughness on 2 bodies with vigilance. It's not the worst. I think what this card is really doing for you in this format is locking up the ground. I don't think you can necessarily attack in because the opponent's also going to be locking up the ground. I think that's where this format's going. I think it's going to be much slower than Phyrexia All Will Be One. But it's a square deal. It's very solid for its mana cost. All right, Core Halberd, 1 white. Equipment, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Equipped for 1 colorless. This, if anyone remembers the original Mirrodin, other than the white in its cost up here, is strictly better than Leonin Scimitar, which was colorless to play and didn't give vigilance. And Leonin Scimitar was a very effective, very playable piece of equipment. Not as good as Bone Splitter, right? Bone Splitter gave +2/+0 for the same price. But Leonin Scimitar was always good. And this is a fantastic piece of equipment for its mana cost, and the equip cost in particular. So yeah, you can just kind of equip this thing around pre-combat, post-combat. It's going to give you a significant advantage over the opponent. With a low equip cost like this and a power toughness boost, I would run probably, several pieces of equipment like this in a deck. Usually I like to have just one, but if the equipment's really high quality like this, I could see running 2 or 3 pieces easily. It's just an onboard trick. You can keep using it as a mana sink and applying value over the course of a long game, which I think is where this format's going to be. So, Core Halberd. I like it. Norn's Inquisitor. So we've got a 1/1 uncommon for 2, Thyorexia Knight. When it ETBs, you incubate 2. So that's a 2/2 creature that requires another 2 mana to turn on. Whenever a permanent you control transforms into a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it. There are a lot of transforming cards. I went and looked at the double face card section. Every color has 5 double face cards that are monocolor. 4 that are uncommons, 1 that's a common. The common is always a creature. There's a cycle of them. And then there are incubator tokens, of course, and those turn into Phyrexians. So Norn's Inquisitor would work very well in an incubator token deck. It's also going to work very well in a deck that's full of battles and double face cards. Do any of the battles turn into Phyrexians, or do they turn into non-Phyrexians? I have to double check on that. I know the little common creatures flip into Phyrexians. Anyway. So Norn's Inquisitor, at the very least, can be a 1/1 plus a 3/3 because of its own ability. That takes a total investment of 4 mana to do, but that's on rate, and there's additional upside baked into this card. I think this is good, it's especially good if you're able to get this effect more than once. I think it is playable even without it. Phyrexian Awakening. There's a number of these enchantments like this that give Phyrexians a keyword ability and make a big incubate token when they come down, so you get an enchantment and an artifact. That's neat. Kamigawa had a thing where if you have an enchantment and an artifact, it turns on some aspect of a card. Might be time to revisit that. Anyway, this is a 3-mana enchantment. It's uncommon. When it ETBs, you incubate 4. So if you have 2 mana laying around, you get a 4/4. And Phyrexians you control have Vigilance. So for a total of 5 mana, paid in installments, you can have a 4/4 Vigilance. And if you have other Phyrexians, like Incubate tokens, or I should say Incubator tokens. Incubate is the action word ability. Anyway. Then you might be able to give other creatures Vigilance, and that's a really nice ability. I think this card's pretty good. Has good impact on the board and can play into synergies nicely. Like this Norn's Inquisitor. I think it's going to be pretty effective. Alright, Phyrexian Censor. This is a 3/3 for 3. Phyrexian Wizard. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn. Non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So, in Limited, in this format, there's a decent chance that your opponent will have some Phyrexian spells scattered in their deck. So I don't know how much you can, tax them down to 1 spell a turn. Sometimes you will, but I don't feel like it's going to come up all the time. But non-Phyrexian creatures entering the battlefield tapped you could really build around this, I feel like, to make it much harder for the opponent to have effective blockers, where they have to take a turn off to get their creature down and then untap it. Now, we haven't seen a lot of symmetrical effects for a long time. I just did a review of Homelands, and it's full of symmetrical effects, so it's going to turn my brain on to reading for symmetry in rules. Right, this doesn't say like each opponent and your opponent's non-Phyrexian creatures. This affects you too. That's what I mean by a symmetrical effect. So if you just throw this into a white deck and you don't have a lot of Phyrexians, you could end up crippling yourself more than you cripple your opponent. A 3/3 for 3 is on rate, right? It's a perfectly solid creature at 3 mana. But you don't want to get crippled by this, by the symmetry. You want this in a deck where you've at least got a decent number of Phyrexians. The more that this card trips you up, the less and less good it is as a 3/3 for 3. So, buyer beware. Phyrexian Censor. Right, Realmbreaker's Grasp. Aura for 2 in white. Enchant an artifact or creature. The permanent can't attack or block, and its activate abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. This turns off vehicles nicely. There's not a lot of vehicles, but it would actually totally shut off a common, I think it's common, vehicle that can tap for mana, but only if it's a creature. But you can't crew it, so it's not a creature, which means that you can't use its mana ability, so Realmbreaker's Grasp would totally turn it off. I think that's kind of interesting. Anyway, overall, this is going to be some premium removal. Good to get a big critter out of the way. You can actually use it aggressively to get rid of a blocker, unlike some of the other removal we looked at earlier. So I think this is a really good one. Scroll Shift. Common, 3 mana, instant, exile up to 1, target artifact, creature, or enchantment you control, then return it to the battlefield. Under its owner's control, draw a card. So this is an immediate flicker effect. Right? It comes right back immediately. This is going to be great with creatures with ETB triggers. Right? So creatures that, or not just creatures, but artifacts and enchantments as well. Things that come in and like incubate, for example. Right? Flickering this Phyrexian Awakening would be great. You get another incubator token with 4 counters. That sounds good. You also draw a card, so Scroll Shift replaces itself. I think this card is going to be a pretty significant role player in this format. You can only flicker your own things, so you can't, like, get rid of an opponent's token creature or something. But I think Scroll Shift is really good. I think it's going to be very useful. Expect it to crop up all over the place. Yeah, you can also just, at the very base level, like save a blocking creature, like block on the opponent's turn, flicker your thing, draw a card, keep it alive. You know, Scroll Shift is going to find uses. I think it's pretty good. Seal from Existence. This is an uncommon, 1 white enchantment. It has Ward 3. That makes it very hard to target. When it enters the battlefield, exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. This is an Oblivion Ring on steroids. Ward 3 means this is actually really hard to interact with. You know, in Constructed, there are ways to make an opponent sacrifice an enchantment, such as you know, Invoke Despair is an example. But it's so hard to target. It's nigh impossible to target, really. That I think this could be good enough to see Constructed play, and is definitely good enough to see Limited play. The only thing holding it back is double white pips. You need a pretty good amount of white in your deck to run this, but it is Just amazing removal. Again, you can use this offensively to clear out a blocker. It works on any non-land permanent. Alright, so you could get rid of an opponent's annoying battle. Whatever you want. This is great. I think this is like a top pick as far as removal that you want in white. Sigiled Sentinel. This is a common. It's 2/2 for 3 mana in white. Human Knight. Has Vigilance and backup 1. So the Sentinel could be a 3/3 Vigilance, and that would be honestly great. 3/3 Vigilance for 3 mana in limited is normally pretty fantastic. At the very least, in a situation where there's an enormous ground stall, you having a 3/3 over here with Vigilance is helping wall up on your side of the ground. It may not be as good of an attacker as it would be in some formats. You can also, give backup to some other large or flying or evasive creature of yours, put a counter on it. It'll have Vigilance that turn, so you've got a good blocker as well. I think this is a kind of, bread and butter, decent uncommon, plays well with the blue-white Knights deck. Plays well in the +1 counters deck as well for white-green. Square deal. Just overall useful. Alright, Sunder the Gateway. We've got a sorcery, 1 and a white. Common white sorceries are really rare to see, by the way. If you've ever sorted a massive collection of Magic cards, white sorceries are really not that common of a card type. Anyway. Choose 1. Destroy target non-token, artifact, or enchantment an opponent controls, incubate 2. So, you can't blow up your opponent's incubator token. Can't do it. It has to target a non-token, artifact, or enchantment. Still, there are some good ones in the format. So the flexibility to be able to do this on this card is nice. You incubate 2. When you destroy, a non-token artifact or enchantment out of an opponent's. So there's a lot of value packed in there. Right? Blow something up. Later you can have 2/2 if you pay 2 mana. You can also incubate 2 and transform an incubator token you control. So you could have a 2/2 immediately. You could also, make an incubator 2 token and transform your 4/4 from Phyrexian Awakening. That's tricky. That's neat. Doesn't have to be the same token. Sunder the Gateway. As a 2/2 for 2, it's playable but very forgettable. But it has the added flexibility of blowing up artifacts and enchantments that are non-token. With upside, with value tacked on, a body you can get later. I like this. I like that you can play it main deck and it's not just a sideboard card. Yeah, this is better than a 0.5. I think it's better than a 1 as well. I think this is a pretty decent card. One that you would not be embarrassed to run in your deck. Okay, get to Surge of Salvation. It's 1 white, instant, uncommon. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So that's a pretty nice trick to blow out removal. Prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. Okay, so this is an okay trick. If you're against a black or red deck specifically, it's going to be better. I don't know that this is actually as good as some just straight up combat tricks we looked at earlier, or some, straight up like cheap removal. I think you can play it. I think it's playable, but I don't think it's as good as you want it to be in limited. I think it could have some constructed applications possibly, but in limited I think it's more like a kind of a niche counterspell that once in a while blows out black-red opponents. So maybe main deckable. You'll feel really bad if you're the black-red player and you see this across the table from you, but I think it's a little more fringe. Alright, Swordsworn Cavalier. So 3/1 for 2, common, human knight. Has first strike as long as another knight entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So this is offensive first strike, because it's hard to make a knight enter on the opponent's turn. I think if you're in the knight deck and you're consistently giving this creature first strike, then it's very good. I think it's actually a creature that can come in and break the stalemate, at least for the opening salvo of turns. Maybe you can tempo the opponent out with your knight deck. If that is your road to victory, then I think this is a good part of it. If that's not what you're doing, if you only turn on first strike, like, on rare occasion, don't have that many knights in your deck, then I think this is very so-so. A decent blocker. I don't think it's going to be a very good attacker in this format. There's, 1/1 token creatures and other little things laying around that are going to clog up the battlefield, and if you don't have first strike, I don't think this can really attack in very well. Alright, Tiller of Flesh. 4 mana, just 1 white pip, uncommon. It's a 2/4 Thyorexia Knight. Whenever you cast a spell that targets 1 or more permanents, incubate 2. So this is a build around uncommon, kind of like a signpost uncommon. So maybe you play this in the knight deck, maybe you play this in like a spells deck, where you have a lot of things that target your permanents. It doesn't have to target your permanents either. This, when you cast a spell that targets, it could be the opponent's permanents also. This could just go nicely into a deck full of removal as well. Just incubate whenever you blow up something of the opponent's or enchant it. That sounds good. That sounds pretty good. It's a good blocker too. It's going to be a lot of, like 2 power and 3 power incubator tokens running around, and a 2/4 I think is going to match up nicely. I think Tiller of Flesh might be better than it looks. Yeah, you don't have to do like a spells deck, Voltron deck in order to get the value off of this. You can be interacting with the opponent's stuff and get the value off your Tiller of Flesh. So I think, like white-black, white-red are going to like this card. Oh. Okay. Okay, sign me up. I think Tiller of Flesh is good. I think it's good. Red Zolfirian Lancer. It's a uncommon human knight, 3/3 for 3. Whenever another knight enters the battlefield under your control, this gets +1/+1 and vigilance. So 3/3 for 3 is par for the course. If you're in the Knights deck, then you can make this a 4/4 with vigilance, maybe even bigger. Right? If you're making knight tokens, and there are ways to do that, to where you're making multiple knights enter the battlefield, then the Zolfirian Lancer, if this is a 5/5 with vigilance, that's way above rate for 3 mana. So if you can do that in your knight deck, this is going to be fantastic. But if you just turn it on a decent amount of the time as a 4/4 vigilance creature, that's big enough to be able to get in, even with the ground stalls that I'm imagining in this format. So this is going to be pretty good, I think. All right, we will cover the double face cards and such now. Okay, sticking with the commons and uncommons here. We've got Invasion of Bellon. I'll read it for you so you don't have to crane your neck. It's a battle siege. It's got 5 defense. When this enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. So it's 3 mana for a 2/2 knight token. has 5 loyalty. When you attack this down, it turns into Bellon War Anthem. Creatures you control get +1/+1. So on the backside, it's just a glorious anthem. And it gives you a creature on the front side, and the creature can help you attack down the battle. That's pretty good. That is not bad at all. Now, I'm not sure how well a 2/2 token can get in for combat in this format. I think the ground is going to be really clogged up. Still, giving you more power toughness on the field in order to flip the battle, to give you even more power and toughness, seems pretty good. Definitely playable. Alright, Invasion of Dominaria. This is also an uncommon. Battle Siege, white and 2 colorless, has 5 defense. When this enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life and draw a card. So, this replaces itself, helps to stall the game, does not help you to attack this battle down. So, not sure how I feel about that. If you do manage to attack it down, you get Seraph Faithkeeper. Seraph Faithkeeper is a 4/4 Flying Vigilance, like Serra Angel. 4/4 Flying Vigilance is a really nice payoff to get, but the card doesn't help you to flip the battle in any way. Just, kind of like spinning its wheels, you gain 4 life, draw a card, kind of get deeper into the game and deeper into your deck. Doesn't help you deal the 5 to this in order to flip it over. So, really good if you do flip it, but not sure how I feel about it. Okay, we'll skip the rares here. Got Seraph of New Capenna. It's a 2/2 Flying Angel Soldier for 3. Just kind of a Windrake in white. 4 and a black Phyrexian mana, transform the Seraph of New Capenna, activate only as a sorcery. I imagine most of these people are going to pay the life unless they're getting very low. So you could probably think of this as, get this down on turn 3, turn 4, you could choose to do this as a sorcery. Pay 2 life, 4 colorless. Flips into Seraph of New Phyrexia. Phyrexian Angel, flying, 3/3. It's black and white. When it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature or artifact, and if you do, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So it's kind of like a mini version of Fallen Angel, if you remember that card. Just has the 1-time attack trigger to do it. So, it's a pretty good, pretty aggressive flyer. Can get in as a 5/4 as long as you're sacrificing things. So yeah, you could take a very aggressive line with this card on turn 4. It'll cost you life to do it, and it means you're going to sink 7 total mana into this card over 2 turns, and 2 life. And you need to sacrifice something to get it up to 5 power. That's starting to be a lot of costs. So, it's a very aggressive play, but it would work better if you have an aristocrat strategy, if you have food to fuel it. So, decent card, really is kind of asking for a little bit of deck synergy, though, to take full advantage. Sunblessed Guardian, this is an uncommon, 2/2 for 2. Just, it's a bear, human cleric. 5 colorless and a Phyrexian red, transform Sunblessed Guardian only as a sorcery. So this one, you can play it early, have a 2-drop. Much later in the game, you can flip it over into a Furnace Blessed Conqueror. It's white-red. It's a 3/3 Phyrexian cleric. Whenever it attacks, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of this. Put a +1/+1 counter on that token for each counter that's on the Furnace Blessed Conqueror. So you have to make that work yourself. If if you can find a way to put counters on it, so much the better. Otherwise, it'll just be a pair of attacking 3/3s. You sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. So pretty aggressive. Takes 5 mana to flip it into this. Then you'll get 6 attacking power, maybe more with +1 counters. Not as good defensively. Maybe that's a theme with these little critters. Overall, I think it's playable. I think once you get to the point that you flip this over, a pair of 3/3s or better is pretty good attacking line stats. But my gut instinct is telling me this is a slower format, and maybe the Sunblessed Guardian is not as good as it looks. And it doesn't even look that great. The front side's just a bear. Can, obviously help you cast your Convoke spells earlier. You do need some kind of board presence, but maybe you could do better than this. Tarkir Dune Shaper, this is a common. It's a 1/2 dog warrior for 1 white. You can pay 4 colorless and a Phyrexian green to transform this only as a sorcery. So as a 1-drop, maybe it's good for Convoke. Otherwise, I think it's pretty lousy as a 1-drop. You can, later in the game though, flip it into a 4/3 Phyrexian Dog Warrior with Trample. And that takes either 4 mana and 2 life or 5 mana with green. So yeah, once you get it to be a 4/3 Trampler, then I think it's a pretty good body on the table. And, if you can come down early, help you cast something with Convoke, and then later you can turn it into this 4/3 Trampler, then I think you've gotten your value out of it at that point. If you're just playing it with no particular synergy, just to transform it later in the game, then I think it's kind of mediocre.